Now that we've had a little bit more time to review Donald Trump's Attorney General William Barr's four-page summary of the Mueller investigation, we're starting to get a sense of the full scope of the absurdity and dishonesty of it. And we're going to go through it in some detail today. Now, later, I will let you know, I guess I'm letting you know now, but we'll get into it in more detail, that the Republican Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, has already blocked a resolution to release the full Mueller investigation report. And this is one data point that is increasingly illuminating what it is that is taking place here. There's an attorney and professor at University of New Hampshire named Seth Abramson, who put together a really great Twitter thread down to the fine grit detail of how William Barr's four-page Mueller investigation summary is essentially a total scam or sham, use whichever or both words that you want. And to really understand this, we do have to get into some detail, and I'm going to do my best to sort of ballpark it for you and then give you some specific examples because I want everybody to understand it. I don't want people's eyes to glaze over, but I also want to do it in a way that doesn't ignore the detail. So William Barr put out a four-page document, the first page of which we're putting on the screen for our audience. And one really important thing to understand is that Donald Trump's Attorney General William Barr published not a summary of the investigation. William Barr published a summary of the investigation. Now, you might be saying, David, you're already sort of losing me here. What I mean by that is that Robert Mueller did the investigation, which includes all sorts of raw evidence, case files, testimony, pages and pages and pages of evidence. Robert Mueller then wrote a report, a summary, we could call it, which he sent to William Barr. Presumably, Mueller sent both the case files, meaning all the data and the evidence, as well as his summary to William Barr. He might not have, but let's assume that he did. William Barr summarized the summary, not the evidence, and included just pieces of 4 sentences from Robert Mueller's summary of his own investigation. Okay, so it's a summary of a summary rather than a summary of the full investigation data. Why do we care about that? The reason we care is because Robert Mueller's summary is only about decisions made either to prosecute or not to prosecute without the further underlying evidence. So I'll give you an example to try to make this crystal clear. Robert Mueller's summary of the investigation could say, based on all the evidence about obstruction, I decided I could not prosecute Trump, but I also cannot exonerate him. Fine. However, if we looked at the raw evidence from the investigation, it might indicate that Robert Mueller had, for example, 80% of what he needed to prosecute Donald Trump for obstruction. Mueller gives Barr a summary which says, I didn't have enough to indict on obstruction. You might need 95% to indict on obstruction. But Barr, because he's summarizing a summary, says merely that there was not evidence to indict for obstruction and implies that there was not any evidence that Donald Trump obstructed justice. It's tricky wording, so many people simply don't notice the difference, but it's extraordinarily important. The strategic decision that William Barr made, and he has a lot of experience in this, as an article from Tom Hartman tells us, which we'll deal with later on in the program, Barr made the strategic decision to summarize the summary because it will foment the idea of it's very binary. Was there collusion or wasn't there collusion? Is the president exonerated or is the president not exonerated? And if we actually saw the full case file, we would almost certainly see a ton of evidence supporting criminality by Donald Trump and associates on many fronts, but likely not enough for Mueller to independently make the decision to prosecute. There's a sort of analogy that we could imagine with burglary. Imagine that Robert Mueller was hired to investigate burglary. And if you look at his raw case file that lists all of the evidence, he might say, okay, the alleged burglar was in the location, was spotted in the location at the time, and the alleged burglar was previously someone who had provided a service. It was the cable guy at the house that was ultimately burglarized, and the burglar was caught with some piece of paper that looks like it came from the house that was burglarized. But I ultimately can't prove this beyond a reasonable doubt because the surveillance footage doesn't show the burglar. If Mueller summarizes that, Mueller would say, I am unable to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that this individual committed the burglary. If Barr comes in and summarizes the summary, you can imply that there was no evidence whatsoever, when in fact, as I've just described to you, there was evidence, but not enough to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that an indictment was relevant. Let me give you another example of a really important semantic game that William Barr plays here. If you look at the last paragraph of page 1 of Barr's summary, it says that the special counsel thoroughly investigated allegations of conspiracy with the Russian government to interfere in the 2016 election. And later it says that they didn't find evidence of that. This is an important vocabulary distinction. Mueller was not meant to investigate merely conspiracy. If you go back to the appointment of the special counsel, and we're putting that up on the screen, which outlines exactly what the special counsel is supposed to be doing, it says very clearly under paragraph B, subsection 1, that the special counsel is investigating any links and or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign. Let's go back to the Barr report again. The Barr report, as written by William Barr, references only investigating conspiracy. Conspiracy is only one way in which there could be coordination or links, and it's way narrower than the full scope of what Robert Mueller was looking at. And once again, because William Barr is summarizing Mueller's summary and not the evidence, all of the possible evidence for links and for coordination simply aren't mentioned by Barr. Barr says conspiracy was investigated. That means agreements of some kind for illegal purposes. You could have links, you could have coordination, and still not have conspiracy. Barr is being deceptive by being overly specific, which is a common way that people can obfuscate underlying evidence. And as Seth Abramson says, Barr is adopting Trump's very specific definition of collusion, the narrowest possible definition, referring only to the crime of conspiracy, and says there wasn't evidence of that which justified an indictment. This is a sham, okay? Now, let me give you another example of how wacky we now recognize this 4-page report to be. Barr starts to mix and confuse legal language, which sounds sort of innocuous to the average layperson, but it's not, okay? In the same paragraph of his report, Barr says that Mueller did not find that the Trump campaign conspired with or coordinated with Russia. But then when he quotes from Mueller's summary, says the investigation did not establish that members of Trump's campaign conspired. Establish is a term with a very specific legal meaning. Establish with enough evidence to justify an indictment or to indicate that a particular crime has been committed. Did not find, which is Barr's language, suggests 0% evidence if you look at the underlying case file that Mueller has. Whereas did not establish could mean 50% proof, could mean 60% proof, could mean 80% proof. It could be anything short of what you would need for an indictment, sort of beyond reasonable doubt. These are legal games that Barr is an expert in playing, which we're going to get to later. He has a long history of this. There's much more. I couldn't possibly cover all of it in one segment or even in one show. So in the description to the YouTube clip for this story, we're linking to Seth Abramson's tweet thread. Bottom line, the report is a sham. Every hour that goes by, we learn more about the ways in which it is a sham. And to be clear, I've been saying it for more than a year. We actually have a phone call I got a year ago, which we'll play for you tomorrow, to prove that I've been saying it for more than a year. This doesn't mean that Donald Trump personally colluded with Vladimir Putin. We were never expecting that. What it tells us is that William Barr's summary of Mueller's summary is an absolute and total joke, playing a lot of the very common legalese games that people try to play when they want to either widen the scope to their advantage or narrow the scope to their advantage. Depending on the circumstances, one can be more advantageous than the other. And most importantly, if the actual underlying evidence, case files, and report from Mueller truly exonerate Trump, release the report, which Mitch McConnell has already blocked, as I will tell you about later on in today's program. Let me know your reaction and your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Much more on this coming up. Every time I buy one of those variety packs of socks, there's something in there that I like not quite as much as the rest of what's in the package. But with Dollar Sock Crew, you can build your own pack of socks starting as low as $1.60 a pair. You can choose from classic patterns or quirky, vibrant ones. Shop DollarSockCrew.com now and receive 30% off your first order with the code Pakman. That's DollarSockCrew.com, code PAKMAN.